I thought the fever burning through me on December 24th was the only thing making me shiver. That was until my husband opened the door, bringing a folder of divorce papers and a woman wearing a smile sharp enough to cut glass. He told me to get out, thinking he was evicting a sick housewife. He did not know he was actually firing the silent owner of the very empire he stood upon. My name is Claire Whitaker. I was 41 years old, and on the evening of December 24th, I felt like I was 80. The flu had turned my bones into glass shards and my head into a furnace. I lay curled on the beige sectional in our townhouse overlooking the Piscataqua River in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Outside, the world was frosted and festive, the streets lined with holiday lights reflecting off the dark water. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. I had texted my husband 3 hours ago asking him to bring home medicine. The front door unlocked with a sharp click. I tried to sit up, shivering violently under the thin throw blanket. Ethan Caldwell walked in. He did not rush to my side. He did not have a pharmacy bag in his hand. Instead, he carried a thick leather folder and a scent that was definitely not the pine wreath on the door. It was cloying, floral, and expensive. "You're still on the couch," he said. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "I asked you for medicine," I managed to rasp out, my throat feeling like sandpaper. "I can't stop shaking." He ignored me. He walked over to the coffee table and dropped the folder onto the glass surface with a heavy thud. "This is it, Claire. Tonight is the last night," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I'm done waiting for you to catch up." I stared at the papers spilling out. Notice of removal executive director. Petition for legal separation. The words danced before my feverish eyes, making no sense and absolute sense all at once. Before I could process the betrayal, the front door opened again. A young woman stepped out of the winter chill and into my living room. Sloane Mercer. I recognized her immediately. She was 28 years old, an influencer Ethan had hired 6 months ago for a brand campaign. She was glowing with health, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold, dressed in a white coat that probably cost more than my first car. She held a perfectly wrapped Christmas gift, but her eyes were not looking at me. They were scanning my living room, appraising the art, the curtains, the rug. It was an inventory check. "It's smaller than I thought," Sloane said, her voice light and airy, though her eyes were cold. "But the view is nice." Ethan moved to stand beside her, placing a hand on the small of her back. The gesture was so casual, so possessive, it hit me harder than the fever. "Sloane is coming with me to the company dinner tonight," Ethan announced. He looked down at me, huddled in my sweatpants. "She knows how to present herself. Starting tomorrow, she will be handling the investor relations. She'll be the face they see. You can't simply replace me," I whispered, gripping the edge of the blanket. "I built the operational framework. I know. Every single protocol." Ethan laughed, a short, sharp bark. "You did paperwork. Claire, Sloane is a brand. The investors want energy. They want the future, not a sick middle-aged woman shivering on a sofa. Look at you. You are pathetic." He leaned down, his face close enough that I could smell the scotch on his breath. "I want you gone by sunrise," he said. "Pack a bag. Leave the laptop. That is company property. Leave the keys on the counter. You take nothing of value. If you are not gone when we get back, I call the police." My gaze drifted to the side table. The invite for the North Shore Meridian Solutions Holiday Gala was sitting there. I reached out a shaking hand to pick it up. My name, Claire Whitaker, had been aggressively crossed out with thick black marker. Above it, in Ethan's distinctive jagged handwriting, was written Sloane Mercer. Ethan steered Sloane toward his home office, our home office. He took a key from his pocket and locked the door from the outside, ensuring I could not get in to retrieve my files. Then he led her toward the kitchen for a pre-party drink. I did not scream. I did not beg. The shock seemed to cauterize the wound instantly. My mind switched gears from wife to auditor. I was filing away every word, every timestamp, every violation of the shareholder agreement he clearly had not read in years. I looked down at my left wrist. I was wearing a bulky, scuffed digital watch with a rubber strap. Ethan hated it. He called it an eyesore and begged me to wear the Cartier he bought with our joint account last year, but I never took this one off. As the sound of their laughter drifted from the kitchen, the watch buzzed against my fever-hot skin. It was not a notification. It was a rhythmic pulse. Long, short, short, long. A code. Ethan thought he had just kicked a helpless woman out into the snow. He had no idea he had just activated the demolition crew. I dragged myself toward the coat rack near the door. My legs felt like lead weights, but the adrenaline of pure, cold rage was beginning to override the fever. I reached for my old beige trench coat, the one Ethan had called garbage earlier that week. My fingers fumbled with the hem of the inner lining. I found the loose thread I had left there 6 years ago and pulled. The fabric tore with a soft sound. Inside, nestled between the wool and the silk, was a device that looked nothing like the sleek smartphones Ethan and Sloane worshipped. It was a heavy, black block with no camera and no internet browser. It was a hardware-encrypted satellite phone. I pressed the single speed dial button. It rang once. D.K. The voice on the other end was clipped and devoid of surprise. Diane Kincaid. To the world, she was a retired corporate paralegal who grew prize-winning roses. To me, she was the iron gatekeeper of a life I had supposedly left behind. "Activate Protocol Winter Veil," I whispered into the receiver, my breath hitching as a wave of dizziness hit me. "Confirmed," Diane replied instantly. "You being alive is enough." I dropped the phone and slumped against the wall. 10 minutes later, headlights swept across the living room window. It was not an ambulance. A white van pulled into the driveway, the side emblazoned with a generic logo, Riverfront HVAC Services. It looked exactly like a heating repair crew coming out on Christmas Eve for an emergency call. It was the perfect camouflage. 2 men in gray coveralls entered the house. They did not speak to me. They did not ask for insurance cards. They moved with the precision of combat medics. One knelt beside me and inserted an IV line into my arm with a practiced slide of the needle. The fluid felt like ice rushing through my burning veins. The other placed a mask over my face, pumping pure oxygen into my starving lungs. My vision began to clear. Then, she walked in. Diane Kincaid stood in my hallway. She was 60-something, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and a posture that could intimidate a boardroom full of sharks. She looked down at me, not with pity, but with the readiness of a soldier reporting for duty. "Chairwoman Whitaker," Diane said. Hearing that title after 6 years felt like a physical blow. It was a name I had buried to play the role of the supportive wife, the role Ethan had just discarded like a used wrapper. "Diane," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of its old steel thanks to the oxygen. "Status." "The extraction team is ready to move you," Diane said, checking a tablet she pulled from her coat. "We can freeze his assets within the hour. We can lock him out of the servers before he even reaches the appetizer course." "No," I said, pushing the oxygen mask aside slightly. "Do not touch him yet." Diane raised an eyebrow. "He just threw you out into the snow. Claire, he declared war. If we strike now, he becomes a victim. He blames a technical glitch or a misunderstanding," I said, my eyes focusing on the empty spot where the divorce papers had been. "Give him 3 days. Let him have 72 hours. I want him to think he has won. I want him to stand on that stage and feel untouchable." Diane nodded slowly, a small, terrifying smile touching her lips. "Understood. The system has already mirrored the joint accounts. We have a backup of every email sent from the North Shore server in the last 12 months. Every keystroke he makes tonight. Every file he shows that girl. We are seeing it in real time." I leaned my head back against the wall as the medic adjusted the flow of the IV. The fever was still there, but the fire inside me had changed. It was no longer consuming me. It was fueling me. "Countdown begins," I whispered, closing my eyes. "Their Christmas will be a career funeral." As the sedative finally pulled me under, the white ceiling of the van dissolved into the canvas of a charity tent from 6 years ago. The memory was vivid, sharp enough to cut through the haze of my fever. I was standing at the edge of a crowded science fair, watching a group of well-dressed teenagers circle a small table. In the center stood a girl, no older than 10, clutching a clumsy, wires-exposed robot made of scrap metal. She was shaking. The boys were laughing, calling her project a pile of trash. That was the first time I saw Piper Redwood. I did not know then that she was the daughter of Miles Redwood, the most reclusive tech billionaire in the hemisphere. I just saw a terrified child who was about to let the world break her. I did not scream at the bullies. I simply walked over and stood between them and the table. My silence was heavy enough to make them uncomfortable, and they scattered like leaves in the wind. I turned to the girl. She looked up at me, eyes swimming with tears, waiting for pity. "Do not cry," I told her softly, "and do not ask them for permission to believe in what you built. Make them need you." Piper blinked, the tears stopping instantly. She looked at me not as a stranger, but as if I were a suit of armor she could step into. I walked away without asking her name, unaware that those words had just become the compass for a child who would grow up in the blinding spotlight of her father's legacy. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and expensive linen. I was no longer in the van. I was lying in a bed at Frostbridge Private Clinic. The room was dim, windowless, and silent. I knew the protocol here. I was checked in as Jane Doe. No digital records, no cameras in the hallway. I was a ghost. Diane was sitting in a leather armchair in the corner, a holographic tablet illuminating her face. She saw me stir and immediately stood up. "Fever is down to 99, she said, her voice brisk. "You have been out for 6 hours. She turned the tablet toward me. A complex corporate map floated on the screen. At the center was the logo Ethan loved to put on his cufflinks North Shore Meridian Solutions. He spent every dinner party bragging about how he steered that ship, how he navigated the treacherous waters of the market. He truly believed he was the captain. "He is currently logged into the executive dashboard," Diane said, tapping the screen. "He is looking for the operational bylaws. He thinks he can just delete your access." I sat up, ignoring the ache in my joints. Let him look. He will never find my name. Ethan had always been arrogant, but his arrogance was blind. He thought North Shore was his creation because his face was on the magazine covers. He did not know the truth I had hidden behind layers of shell companies. "Show the parent structure," I commanded. Diane swiped up. Above North Shore Meridian Solutions appeared a larger, darker umbrella entity, Onyx Meridian Consortium. "Ethan thinks he answers to a board of faceless investors," I said, a dry laugh escaping my throat. "He has never realized that Onyx Meridian is just a trust fund standing in for me. I was not just his wife. I was his employer. I was the hand that fed him, and tonight he had bitten it off. We can destroy his reputation by noon," Diane suggested, her finger hovering over a command key. "I can leak the photos of him and the girl. I can release the financial discrepancies." "No," I said firmly. "That is messy. That makes me the bitter ex-wife throwing mud. I want this clean. I want him to lose because of his own incompetence, not my interference. Let him fail to deliver to the investors. Let him realize he cannot run the machine he claims to own. Clean, but lethal." Diane nodded, respecting the strategy. But then, a red light began to blink on her console. She frowned, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Claire," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "We have a problem. Someone is pinging the burner phone." "That is impossible." I replied. That hardware is military-grade encryption. Someone is cutting through the firewall like it is paper, Diane said, looking up at me with genuine concern. This is not the police. And it is definitely not Ethan. This is a billion-dollar security algorithm. Someone knows you activated the Winter Veil protocol, and they are hunting for the signal source. I watched the feed from the living room security camera on Diane's tablet. It was the morning of December 25th. Ethan unlocked the front door and ushered Sloane inside, expecting, I assume, to find me weeping amidst a pile of tissues or refusing to leave. Instead, they walked into a void. I had not just left, I had erased myself. The house was scrubbed clean, my books, my coat, the throw pillows I had bought, all gone. The space looked cold and impersonal, like a luxury property staged for an open house. It feels empty, Sloane said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet hallway. She spun around, her coat flaring. Well, good. We can fill it with better energy. I want to host a proper Christmas dinner tonight. A real one. Not whatever boring thing you usually do. Ethan puffed out his chest, relieved that he didn't have to deal with a confrontation. Anything you want? Babe, I want the platinum package from Leclerc's, she demanded, pulling out her phone. Caviar, truffles, the works. I need you to put down the deposit now. They are charging double for the holiday rush. Ethan pulled out his black Amex with a flourish. He called the caterer on speakerphone so Sloane could hear him take charge. Charge $5,000 to the card ending in 409, Ethan said confidently. There was a pause on the line. Then, the caterer's voice came back, strained. I am sorry, Mr. Caldwell, the card was declined. Ethan frowned. That is ridiculous. Run it again. Declined again. Sir, do you have another method of payment? Ethan's laugh was nervous. He pulled out his Visa. Bank error. Use this one. Declined. Sloane's smile froze. Her eyes darted from the phone to Ethan's face. A flicker of calculation replacing the adoration. Ethan, is everything okay? It is just a fraud alert, Ethan snapped, sweating now. I traveled yesterday. The system is just being sensitive. Before he could spin another lie, the doorbell rang. It was not a guest. It was a courier holding a thick red envelope. Ethan signed for it, tearing it open with shaking hands. The letterhead read, Hartwell and Riggs, LLP. It was a fictional law firm Diane had created years ago for this exact contingency. Ethan read the bold text aloud, his face draining of color. Notice of acceleration, he whispered. Demand for immediate payment of full principal balance. $1.3 million. What does that mean? Sloane asked, stepping closer to read over his shoulder. It means they are calling in the mortgage. Ethan stammered. And the car, and the business loan. They are cross-collateralized. I have 24 hours to pay everything. He didn't wait. He grabbed his keys and sprinted out the door, driving like a maniac to the nearest branch of his private bank. We switched feeds to the audio bug Diane had planted in his car. We heard him screaming at his account manager over the Bluetooth system. Why are my accounts frozen? Who authorized a callback on my loans? Ethan yelled. The banker's voice was calm and apologetic. Mr. Caldwell, your debt portfolio was sold this morning to a private holding firm called Onyx Meridian Consortium. They cited a clause regarding material change in leadership stability and reputational risk. Given your filing for separation and the removal of the previous director, the risk algorithm locked your assets automatically. Ethan slammed his hand against the steering wheel. I am the stability. I am the company. Back in the clinic, I took a sip of water. The irony was delicious. He had cited my removal as his power move, and that very action was the trigger that froze his entire life. Should we shut him down completely? Diane asked, her finger hovering over the execute button. Not yet, I said, watching the GPS dot of his car speeding aimlessly. Let him go home. Let him try to explain this to Sloane. Let him lie to her. Diane tapped another window on the screen. "You might want to see this." It was a screen capture of Sloane's phone. While Ethan was panicking in the car, Sloane was in my kitchen, texting a group chat named the A-List. The message read, "He is acting weird. Cards declined. Something about a loan. Do you guys think he is actually liquid? Or is he just another poser?" I smiled. The seed was planted. Ethan thought he was fighting a bank error. He did not realize the ground beneath him was already dissolving. Sloane returned to the townhouse less than 2 hours after Ethan left, and the slam of the front door shook the frame of the house. I watched on the tablet screen as she stormed into the living room, her face twisted in a mask of fury that ruined her perfectly curated aesthetic. She did not look like the compassionate girlfriend anymore. She looked like an investor who had just realized she bought stocks in a sinking ship. "My card was declined at the spa." "Ethan!" she screamed, throwing her designer bag onto the couch. "Do you know how humiliating that is?" The receptionist looked at me like I was a thief. Ethan, who had returned from the bank empty-handed and sweating, tried to approach her. "Baby, listen to me. It is just a misunderstanding with the holding company. I will fix it by tomorrow." "You better fix it," Sloane hissed, backing away from his touch. "Because I did not sign up for its poverty. If you are broke, tell me now so I can stop wasting my time." Before Ethan could concoct another lie, his cell phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and paled. It was the HR department at Hawthorne Ridge Dynamics, the firm where he held his actual day job. He put it on speaker, his hands shaking. "Mr. Caldwell," a stiff voice said, "we have had an urgent request from a new majority investor. They are demanding an immediate compliance audit of your department. You need to come in now to explain some discrepancies in your expense reports." "Now," Ethan stammered. "It is Christmas Day." The auditors do not care about holidays. "Sir, be here in 30 minutes, or we will assume you are resigning." Ethan looked at Sloane, then at the door. Panic won. He grabbed his coat, abandoning his angry mistress to save the only lifeline he thought he had left. He did not know that leaving Sloane alone in the house was the mistake that would seal his fate. In the clinic. Diane tapped a command on her keyboard. "He is gone," initiating the lure. Inside the townhouse master bedroom, a small electronic beep sounded from behind the large oil painting of a sailboat Ethan loved. It was the wall safe. Diane had remotely disengaged the locking mechanism for exactly 15 minutes. Sloane heard the beep. She walked into the bedroom, her eyes narrowing. She pushed the painting aside and saw the digital keypad blinking green. She tried the handle, but it was still latched. It needed a code. She didn't hesitate. She typed in Ethan's birthday. The door swung open. Sloane's face lit up with greed, expecting stacks of cash or bonds. Instead, she pulled out a stack of paper. Her expression crumpled. It was the demand letter for the $1.3 million, followed by notices of credit freeze, and most damning of all, photocopies of wire transfers Ethan had made to offshore gambling sites using company funds. She didn't cry. She didn't look heartbroken. She looked practical. She pulled out her phone and began photographing every single document, ensuring the resolution was high enough to read the numbers. "She is building an insurance policy," Diane noted dryly. Once she had the photos, Sloane reached to the back of the safe. She found a velvet box containing the emerald earrings and diamond tennis bracelet I had inherited from my grandmother. She shoved the jewelry into her purse, not as a sentimental keepsake, but as a severance package. "I can't believe he is broke," Sloane muttered to herself, checking her reflection in the mirror. Okay, Sloane. You are the victim here. He lied to you too." She was already rewriting the narrative. She did not love Ethan. She loved the lifestyle he promised. Now that the promise was broken, she was preparing to jump to the next lifeboat. I watched her cold calculation from my hospital bed. I felt no triumph, only a dull ache of confirmation. Traitors always think they are practical, I whispered. She will sell him out before the sun goes down. Diane glanced at the communication log. Ethan is trying to call you. He has dialed your old number 12 times in the last 10 minutes. Let him ring, I said. He is getting the automated response we set up, Diane said, a small smirk playing on her lips. Every time he dials, the system just says, "Do not say her name." By the time the sun began to set on the second day, I was no longer a patient. I had been moved to a secure penthouse overlooking the Boston Harbor. It was a fortress in the sky, accessible only via a dedicated elevator that required a retina scan. The walls were glass, the furniture was stark white, and the air smelled of ozone and filtered ventilation. There was no name on the mailbox downstairs, just a floor number. It was the perfect vantage point to watch a life dismantle. Diane stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a holographic timeline projected onto the glass. "We are on schedule," she said, her finger tracing the timeline. "At 8 in the morning tomorrow, the asset seizure team moves in on the townhouse. By 9, EAT initiates the total lockout of his executive credentials. By 10, we force the signature on the separation agreement." "Where do we end it?" I asked, looking down at the dark water below. "We could do it at the lawyer's office," Diane suggested. "Quiet, private." "No," I said, turning to face her. "He loves an audience. He loves the trappings of power. We will do it in the main lobby of the Onyx Meridian Tower. I want him to stand in the center of the empire he thought he ruled and realize he is just a guest who overstayed his welcome. No private rooms, no viral videos, just the crushing weight of the architecture." A chime from the secure entry system interrupted us. A courier from Redwood Technologies was waiting in the lobby. He carried a single, thick envelope. Diane retrieved it and handed it to me. Inside was a handwritten letter on heavy cream paper. The handwriting was elegant but forceful. It was from Piper Redwood, now 16 years old. I heard the protocol was active. The note read, "My father's legal team is ready to bury him in litigation for the next decade. Just say the word. I am paying my debt." I ran my thumb over the ink. It was tempting. One call to Miles Redwood, and Ethan would be crushed by a billion-dollar legal hammer. But I shook my head and placed the letter on the table. "If the Redwoods jump in now, Ethan spins it," I said. "He becomes the little guy crushed by a corporate conspiracy. He plays the victim. I need him to fall because he tripped over his own arrogance." Diane nodded, but her expression remained grim. "The tabloids are already sniffing around. There is a blind item on a local gossip site about a mystery heiress ruining her husband. Someone is trying to control the narrative." "Let them talk," I said. "Whatever story they spin tonight will die when the facts come out tomorrow." Diane tapped her tablet again, bringing up a new file. "Speaking of facts, the audit of his work email is complete. You are going to want to see this." I walked over and looked at the screen. My stomach turned. Not from heartbreak, but from sheer disbelief at his stupidity. Ethan had treated his corporate email account like a personal diary. There were hundreds of threads with Sloane. He had sent her confidential product roadmaps so she could create insider content for her social media. He had begged her for patience when cash was tight. He had even expensed their hotel stays under client acquisition costs. He used the company server to solicit a mistress and leak trade secrets, Diane said, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is not just grounds for firing. This is corporate espionage." "It is perfect," I whispered. "So, do we have security pick him up at the townhouse?" Diane asked. "No," I said, a cold plan forming in my mind. "Leave him a fake exit. Send a notification to his phone that there is an emergency board meeting at the tower at 11. Let him think he still has a chance to talk his way out of this. Let him think he is coming to save his job." I looked out at the city lights, my reflection ghosting against the glass. "Tomorrow," I said. "Do not let the police catch him on the street. I want him to walk through those doors willingly. I want him to come looking for the answer and find me. At 8 o'clock in the morning on the third day, the end of Ethan's world arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet, terrifying precision of a corporate execution. The asset recovery team pulled up to the curb in 3 unmarked black sedans. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, and no drama. Just 4 men in dark suits carrying clipboards and a court order backed by the full weight of the Onyx Meridian Consortium. I watched the feed as Ethan threw open the front door, his face unshaven and his eyes wild from 2 days of panic. He tried to physically block the entrance with his body, slamming his shoulder against the heavy oak wood. "You have no right," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This is private property. Get off my porch." The lead agent did not even blink. He simply pushed the door firmly. The resistance was futile. Ethan lost his footing and sprawled backward, crashing hard onto the imported Italian marble floor he used to brag about to every guest who walked in. He scrambled backward like a crab, looking up at the men looming over him. "Mr. Caldwell," the agent said, stepping inside and wiping his shoes on the mat. "Per the acceleration clause triggered yesterday, ownership of this residence has reverted to the lender. You are currently trespassing on holding company property." Behind him, the team moved like a swarm of locusts. They did not break anything. They simply possessed it. Bright orange stickers reading "Seized Property" were slapped onto the grand piano, the oversized television, and the wet bar. "Do not touch that," Ethan yelled, scrambling to his feet and lunging for a vase. "That is mine." The agent caught his wrist mid-air. "Actually, sir, the audit shows this was purchased with funds from the joint account, which is now frozen collateral." Ethan sputtered, his face turning purple. "I need my things, my clothes, my laptop." The agent looked at him with a gaze devoid of sympathy and recited, almost verbatim, the words Ethan had thrown at me just 72 hours prior. "You have 5 minutes to exit the premises," the agent said coolly. "You may leave with only what is currently on your person. Everything else is subject to inventory." Ethan stood frozen, the cruelty of the echo hitting him in the chest. Then he heard the click of heels on the stairs. He spun around, hope flaring in his eyes. "Sloan," he gasped. "Sloan, tell them who I am." Sloan descended the staircase, looking like she was heading to a runway show. She was wearing her sunglasses indoors and pulling 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases that she had clearly packed while he was sleeping. She did not look at the agents. She stopped on the bottom step and looked at Ethan. "Sloan." "We need to call a lawyer," Ethan pleaded, reaching for her hand. She pulled back as if he were contagious. "There is no we." "Ethan," she said, her voice ice cold. "I checked the registry. You don't own the company. You don't own the house. You are a fraud." "I can fix this," he begged, desperation leaking from every pore. "It is just a leverage play." "You are a sinking ship," she said, adjusting her scarf, "and I don't swim in economy." She stepped over his legs as if he were a pile of dirty laundry and walked out the open door without looking back. 2 minutes later, Ethan was physically escorted out. The door slammed shut, and the deadbolt slid home with a finality that echoed in the cold morning air. He stood on the sidewalk in his wrinkled dress shirt and trousers, shivering violently in the New England winter. He had no car keys. He had no wallet. He had nothing but the phone clutched in his freezing hand. The screen lit up. A single text message from a blocked number. "Want to know why? Come to Onyx Meridian Tower." "Now!" Rage replaced the shock. He believed he was the victim of a coup. He believed he could still shout his way back into power if he could just find the person responsible. He flagged down a passing taxi, waving his arms frantically. The cab screeched to a halt. Ethan threw himself into the back seat, his teeth chattering. "Onyx Meridian Tower," he snarled. "Seaport District. Drive." The driver, an older man with tired eyes, looked at Ethan in the rearview mirror. He took in the shaking hands, the manic expression, and the lack of a coat in freezing weather. He recognized the destination. "That tower?" the driver asked, his voice low and wary. "Buddy, you sure you want to go there? People who go in there looking like you, they usually don't come out winning." Ethan glared at the reflection in the mirror. "Just drive, I am going to tear that place apart." He swallowed hard, trying to summon the arrogance that had sustained him for years. But deep down, he was terrified. He was heading into the belly of the beast to demand answers, unaware that the beast was waiting for him with its mouth wide open. From my vantage point on the mezzanine, the lobby of the Onyx Meridian Tower looked like a chessboard made of black marble and cold steel. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, designed to amplify the sound of footsteps so that every arrival felt like an announcement. At 20 minutes past 8 o'clock in the morning, Ethan Caldwell walked in. He looked small. The grandeur of the architecture swallowed him whole. The staff, usually a blur of motion, slowed down to watch him. They recognized the look of a man who had lost his gravity. Ethan marched toward the main reception desk, his shoes clicking unevenly on the stone. He looked around wildly, expecting to see me hiding in a corner or crying on a bench. When he saw only security guards and polished surfaces, he slammed his hand onto the granite counter. "I want to see Claire," Ethan shouted, his voice cracking and echoing embarrassingly off the walls. "Call her down. Tell her I am here to accept her apology." The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah whom I had handpicked for her composure, did not flinch. She simply looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "I am sorry, sir," Sarah said, her voice amplified slightly by the microphone. "Are you inquiring about the schedule of Chairwoman Whitaker?" Ethan froze. The title seemed to hit him harder than the cold wind outside. He blinked, his brain failing to bridge the gap between the woman he had bullied for years and the title Sarah had just used. Chairwoman. Ethan laughed, a jagged, nervous sound that made the people nearby look away in second-hand embarrassment. "No, you are mistaken. My wife she is just a housewife. She organizes bake sales." "She does not have a schedule." Before Sarah could answer, a shadow detached itself from the security alcove. Diane Kincaid stepped into the light. She did not smile. She did not offer a handshake. She simply signaled to the 2 armed security officers standing by the turnstiles. "Follow me," Diane said to Ethan, her tone leaving no room for argument. "And be quiet." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but the atmosphere in the lobby shifted. The hum of conversation died out. All eyes turned toward the center of the room. The dedicated VIP elevator, a glass cylinder that rarely moved during business hours, began to descend. The large digital display above the doors flashed a single notification: penthouse access authorized. Ethan looked up, mesmerized. The doors hissed open. I stepped out. I had burned the clothes I wore on Christmas Eve. Today, I wore a bespoke black suit, sharp enough to draw blood. My hair was pulled back tight. The only accessory I wore was a platinum pin on my lapel, the crest of the Onyx Meridian Consortium. I stood there, not as a wife, not as a victim, but as the architecture itself. I walked toward him, the sound of my heels striking the floor with a rhythmic precision that sounded like a gavel coming down. Ethan stared at me. He looked at the pin. He looked at the staff standing at attention. He realized, in a terrifying rush, that the stage he thought he was performing on had never belonged to him. But his survival instinct was a cockroach. It refused to die. He rushed forward, his face twisting into a mask of desperate affection. "Claire," he breathed out, reaching for my hands with his trembling fingers. "Oh, look at you. You are magnificent. I am sorry. I was blind. You are special. I see that now. Let's Let's go home and talk about this. Just you and me. He thought he could charm the woman who used to wait up for him. He thought he could manipulate the silence. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I simply looked at him with the flat, unreadable expression of a stranger viewing a piece of gum on the sidewalk. I let his plea hang in the air, rotting in the silence of the room. Then, I turned my head slightly toward Diane, keeping my voice loud enough to carry to every corner of the silent lobby. "Diane," I asked, my tone bored and clinical. "Who is this person?" I saw the light go out in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of losing the money anymore. He was terrified because, for the first time in his life, he realized he was about to lose his audience. We moved into a soundproof glass conference room adjacent to the lobby. The silence inside was heavy. My lawyer slid a single document across the polished mahogany table toward Ethan. It was an admission of conduct. It required him to confess to 18 months of adultery, gross negligence of his fiduciary duties, and the misappropriation of company funds. In exchange, I agreed not to sue him for reputation damages or emotional distress. It was a mercy kill. Ethan looked at the paper, then up at me. His fear was gone, replaced by a rodent-like cunning. He did not pick up the pen. "You think I will sign this?" Ethan asked, a sneer curling his lip. "You think you can just erase me?" "It is the only way you walk out of here without handcuffs," I said calmly. Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "I don't think so. See, Claire, nobody likes a powerful woman who kicks her husband when he is down. I have a story too. The story of a cold, calculating wife who set a financial trap for her partner. Financial entrapment. That is what I will call it." "That is a lie," Diane cut in sharply. "It is a headline," Ethan shot back. At that exact moment, a chime rippled through the room, then another, then a dozen. Phones were lighting up in pockets and on desks all over the lobby visible through the glass. My own phone buzzed. A push notification from a notorious local gossip blog flashed on the screen. The ice queen of the harbor mystery chairwoman torments husband in sick financial game. Ethan smiled, tapping his own pocket. "I sent the tip an hour ago. Anonymous. Of course. But the narrative is already spinning." Outside the glass, I saw heads turning. The staff was whispering. Through the front revolving doors, I could see the distinct shape of a news van pulling up to the curb. A crowd was forming, hungry for a scandal. They wanted to see the woman who was allegedly destroying a man for sport. They wanted a villain. "Release the full audit logs," Diane said, her hand hovering over her tablet. "We can bury him in facts right now." "No," I said, standing up and smoothing my jacket. "I do not argue with a loser on his stage. If I defend myself now, I look guilty. We leave. Now." "Use the loading dock," the head of security instructed into his earpiece. "Move the vehicle to the rear exit." We moved quickly, flanked by security, heading away from the glass spectacle and toward the industrial gray of the service corridors. We burst out onto the concrete loading dock, expecting the quiet of the alley. We were wrong. Ethan had anticipated the move. He was standing there, pointing at the door as we emerged. Behind him were 5 paparazzi photographers he had likely texted the moment we left the room. "There she is!" Ethan shouted, performing for the lenses. "That is the woman who locked me out of my own home on Christmas. Look at her. She is heartless." The flashbulbs exploded like lightning strikes. I raised my hand to shield my eyes, but the questions hit me like physical blows. "Mrs. Caldwell, is it true you froze his accounts? Did you plan this takeover while he was working? Why won't you comment?" For the first time in 3 days, my breath hitched. I wasn't afraid of Ethan. I was terrified of the shapeless, faceless mob that was about to swallow the truth. The air felt thin. I saw Ethan grinning through the barrage of flashes, winning the war of perception simply by being the loudest victim in the alley. Then, The roar of engines drowned out the shouting. A convoy of 3 silver SUVs, armored and imposing, screeched around the corner. They did not slow down. They mounted the curb, physically placing their heavy metal frames between the press and me, creating an instant wall of steel. The rear door of the middle vehicle flew open before it even came to a complete stop. A figure jumped out. It wasn't a bodyguard. It was a teenage girl in a bright pink puffer jacket that stood out violently against the gray winter backdrop. Piper Redwood. She sprinted across the gap, ignoring the cameras, and slammed into me, wrapping her arms around my waist in a fierce, protective hug. "Back off." Piper screamed at the photographers, her voice cracking with teenage fury but carrying absolute authority. "I am not letting anyone push you out into the street again." Behind her, the other doors opened. Miles Redwood stepped out. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking at the chaotic scene with the bored calm of a man who had survived 1,000 media wars. He walked to my side, placing a hand on Piper's shoulder and looking directly at Ethan. The flashes stopped. The silence returned. And in that silence, the balance of power did not just shift, it evaporated. Miles Redwood did not shout. He did not engage in a screaming match with a desperate man. He simply signaled his head of legal counsel, who stepped forward and handed a thick envelope to the police officer standing near the press line. It contained the IP logs and the digital footprints proving Ethan had used the Hawthorne Ridge Dynamics server to solicit bribes and leak confidential data. It was enough to bury his reputation for a lifetime. Diane stepped into the pool of camera light. Her voice was amplified by the sudden silence of the crowd. "We have just received confirmation from the board of Hawthorne Ridge Dynamics," Diane announced, holding up her tablet for the cameras to see. "Ethan Caldwell has been terminated for cause, effective immediately, due to gross ethical violations and data theft." The mood in the loading dock shifted in a single heartbeat. The photographers lowered their lenses, looking at Ethan not as a victim, but as a liar who had wasted their time. Ethan's face crumbled. He opened his mouth to spin another lie, but the air was suddenly ripped apart by a thunderous noise. A sleek, black helicopter bearing the Redwood insignia descended toward the waterfront helipad adjacent to the tower. The wind from the rotors whipped the snow into a frenzy, stinging our faces. It was a display of raw, untouchable power that made Ethan's little media stunt look like a child's tantrum. Ethan lunged toward the security barrier, his eyes wide with madness. "You can't leave," he screamed, his veins bulging against his collar. I own this story. I am the victim." The sound of the rotors swallowed his voice completely. He was shouting into a hurricane that did not care if he existed. I turned back one last time. I walked close to him, letting the wind tear at my hair, and leaned in so he could see the movement of my lips, even if he could not hear the whisper. "You kicked me out of the company to make me disappear," I said, my voice steady against the gale. "But you forgot. The person best at deleting things is me." I turned and walked toward the waiting aircraft. Piper was already inside, extending her hand to pull me up. I did not look back at the dock. I did not look back at the man standing alone in the cold, abandoned by his mistress, his job, and the crowd he had tried to weaponize. As the helicopter lifted off, banking over the gray waters of the harbor, I pulled out my secure tablet. I opened the final legal documents. With a single tap of my finger, I electronically signed the divorce papers, the asset seizure confirmation, and the permanent removal of Ethan Caldwell from any association with North Shore Meridian Solutions. Down below, the gossip blog post vanished from the internet, taken down by a cease and desist order from Redwood's attorneys. Ethan had no house. He had no job. He had no narrative left to tell. I looked out at the horizon, where the winter sky met the icy water. I took the first deep, clean breath I had taken in years. I looked at Piper, who was grinning at me. "Merry Christmas, Piper," I said softly. This year, I didn't get a gift. I got myself back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with others. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Victoria Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.